Getting started in cybersecurity by Mr. John Stoner, and I'll let him go ahead do his introduction here, and let's give him our attention.
All right, thanks, Zach. All right, hopefully everybody can hear me. So you're here because you're either in cybersecurity and that other track is full, or you want to be in cybersecurity. So thanks for coming to my talk today. So here's my legal disclaimer. I've started to include that. So I'm only here representing myself, not anybody else, not my employer. So I will real briefly talk about this, but it seems really weird to spend much time on this. So I have about 18 years of experience in national security and intel. I have all the different certifications that you can get unless you really want a SANS cert. I actually have my first SANS class next month, so that's exciting. And I really like soccer as well. I secretly joined the Army and got married. I don't necessarily recommend any of those options to anybody. All right, so to get started, cybersecurity. When I'm mentoring some people, which I was actually just doing before, because it would seem cynical not to do that and then present this and tell people they should get a mentor. People say, I want to do something in cybersecurity. Awesome. That really doesn't tell your mentor what you want to do in cybersecurity enough to maybe give you proper advice, right? That's essentially saying, I want to work in the medical field. Okay, well, I could use more to go on. So that's why I start off with this particular explanation here. So there's a lot of different roles in just IT, and there's a lot of different roles just in cybersecurity. So when you're first starting out, if you don't have an IT background, that's going to be critical, is to get that underlying IT fundamental background. If you do have, some of the basics in IT already, then you really should start to narrow down your search a little bit into what it is that you want to study or what it is that you think you want to study in cybersecurity. There's going to be some underlying themes in IT and cybersecurity that most people will generally have some baseline knowledge about, but it can start to get pretty divergent in cybersecurity depending on what it is specifically you're interested in studying in cybersecurity. And there's room for all of you in cybersecurity. There's lots of different roles that we need in cybersecurity. There's lots of jobs that are going unfilled in cybersecurity. So I like to start with this to sort of, in case you have conversations later with your friends or colleagues or other mentors, it helps us give you more specific information if you know for sure, what forensic sounds interesting or something like that. So if you haven't really thought about that aspect yet, I point people back to the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have 52 very well-defined cybersecurity roles. They break out all the knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs, for all of those 52 roles. So if you're not even sure where to start, you don't even know where to go to see what in cybersecurity you might possibly be interested in, then I highly recommend taking a look at that. And even though they have 52, they don't have all of them. Right? So even that, in and of itself, does not encompass every possible role that we have in the cybersecurity field. So pen testers are not specifically called out in there. They have exploitation analysts. It's a little bit of a military flavor to a pen tester. There's not too many companies that hire particularly for that field. They don't call it that job name. And they really don't have cyber threat intelligence called out, which just defends me and everybody else who specifically does cyber threat intelligence. But it will at least give you a starting point to look at the types of fields and look at the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are generally required for entry level or intermediate levels for those types of cybersecurity job roles. So I think that that's a really good resource if you haven't used that before. And again, this is to sort of help you scope down what it is you're interested in studying in cybersecurity. You can also kind of think of it like starting to pick a major when you go to school, right? You can't study every single thing. So there's lots of different analogies I use to explain why this is helpful when you ask for specific advice about getting a job or studying so that you can get a particular job in the cybersecurity discipline. So also, if you have questions throughout the presentation, let me know, and I will have time at the end for questions. So a lot of people have some hesitation just getting started. There's some initial maybe fear or lack of confidence to even start studying on their own. So some of that, I believe, is because people haven't scoped down what they want to study, and that in and of itself is then intimidating because you're trying to study everything in cybersecurity, which is, if you want to have a normal life, I don't recommend that. So there are some underlying things that are probably going to be pretty beneficial. You need to have that IT background. You need to understand some basic cybersecurity underpinnings as well for most job fields in cybersecurity. And I also want to make sure that you're studying something that you like. I would never recommend somebody study something that they don't like. That's not a good life decision. I am not good at programming. Thank God for Google. I passed that class. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a scripter. I have still been able to work as a cyber threat intelligence analyst. All right, I'm also not good at learning second languages, so I have chosen not to try to learn more second languages. It didn't work out for me. So that's just some general sort of career mentorship advice. Find the thing that you're interested in, and then you can sort of start to shape what you're studying around things that you find interesting. A lot of people will come up and say, I want to be a pen tester, I want to be a red teamer. That's pretty cool. I want to look like The Rock. There's a lot of work I have to do for that to happen. May or may not be very realistic, but this is not something you're like, I want to start learning about cybersecurity so I can be a pen tester in 6 months. Because if you guys have curriculum that does that, you will be the next multimillionaire. Becoming a penetration tester is a really lengthy process. So I'm not saying that shouldn't be your goal, but that's a lengthy goal. That requires a lot of expertise that's developed over generally a number of years. So I will always tell people you should look at vulnerability testing or vulnerability assessments as a more natural path to gain expertise that will then help you get that first pen test type of a role. So that's one little rabbit hole, and we can talk about that as much as you guys want. Some people are really interested in PCAPs, log analysis, or you might really be interested in forensics. There's lots of different things you can consider to particularly narrow down the scope to study and get some skills applicable to a particular job field. So how else can you get started? Well, there's lots of free stuff. Hopefully you guys will be able to get my slides. I link to a lot of free websites and PowerPoints and YouTube videos and things like that in here to, again, give you some resources to start. The one thing I want to say about boot camps and the particularly highlighted text on here, and I can say this because I used to teach boot camps are good for one thing, and that's to get a certification. Anybody that tells you that you should take a boot camp to learn anything, don't listen to that person. Because as an instructor, there's very little time for me to teach you anything than the basic core things and how to pass that particular exam. And that's what the boot camp is for. The boot camp is for that instructor to get you to pass that exam so you get that certification. In a lot of cases, that's how the instructors are actually paid. All right, so that wasn't my case, but a lot of the instructors are actually paid based on the student pass rate of that class. So that kind of gives you an idea of what their focus is. And I don't care if it's a Net Plus class, an A Plus class, a Certified Ethical Hacker class, a CISSP class, it's pretty much the standard across those boot camps, and they're also really expensive, and frankly, not all the instructors are really good. Again, I'm allowed to say that I was an instructor. So you can study all of that stuff on your own. Just go get the book from the bookstore or Amazon or the library, or take a college class that teaches that particular skill. So the other problem with those boot camps are you're trying to learn about 700 pages worth of material in a lot of cases in like 40 hours. So a lot of people really aren't learning things during the boot camp. So you could take a networking class or a cybersecurity class or an ethical hacking class through a lot of different universities as semester-long courses now as well. So even the online colleges that offer those classes, which may not be the world's best class on the planet, it's probably going to be a better experience than a boot camp in some cases. So some of this is going to depend on what works for you, but my general advice is if you're just trying to start out, don't spend a lot of money on a boot camp just because you think you need a Net Plus or a Sec Plus certification. Study on your own. There's lots of free websites. And if you can ever get anybody to pay for a SANS course, I still highly recommend that. Like I said, hopefully next month I'll go to my first one. So some people who are here are in college or younger than I am and just trying to break into the work job field in general. And some people are here sort of pivoting mid-career or pivoting late career, as it were. So some of those people are going to have IT networking fundamentals, but some of the younger people in the audience might still be working on those IT networking fundamentals. So you're not going to have to necessarily be network engineer level of underpinning here, depending on what you want to do in cybersecurity, but you really have to understand a lot of the basics. You have to understand TCP/IP and UDP and the three-way handshakes and ports and protocols and how Windows doesn't work and how Linux works and etc. Right? You have to understand a lot of these basic fundamental things that are happening in the operating systems and with the data moving back and forth and how a security appliance works or how it doesn't work or how I would want to break it or why it needs certain security settings. A lot of that is on the IT side. And then it will translate as you start to focus on that particular cybersecurity job role that you've picked out earlier that we talked about. So again, these are all links to various things. Like, I'm a big fan of Professor Messer. It's not just because he's bald too. I think he does a really good job of explaining these concepts, so I like to link to his stuff. There's lots of free resources online. So I tried to collate some of these things in this presentation, so you'll have, a place to start. You can go to here, and then there's Google or Bing. Does anybody use Bing? So education and training. So just like anything else in education and training, everybody has preferred learning styles as well. So some people do really good one-on-one. Some people need that in-person classroom interaction with the other students and the professor. And hopefully at this stage, you kind of understand how you learn best. Some people could read a book and just, it's not the way they learn. They could take notes, they could highlight, it just doesn't come across that way. Maybe somebody is better at watching all these videos online. Right? So you'll kind of have to figure that out a little bit too, but there's lots of resources regardless of your preferred way that you start to absorb this information. So I just think that I want to stress that because it kind of goes back to my boot camp point as well. Some people do good in boot camps, and that's fine. That boot camp, drinking from a fire hose just isn't for everyone, and some people who are in that environment get very frustrated. There's also MOOCs online. I didn't list particular ones, but I think Harvard and MIT have some in particular that are available online for free. And there's a lot of free resources. That's my main thing here is there's lots of free resources to help you on your path to start researching and learning whatever it is that you want. And then bottom, how do you start to actually practice some of the things that you're reading about or learning about online is you need to have a lab. You're going to have to do some of this experimentation on your own. So as a CEH instructor, the EC Council labs are terrible. I hope they don't watch this video, but they're terrible. And they're not realistic. So anything you do in your home lab is pretty much better than what most of the EC Council provides you for CEH. So go buy an old computer from eBay or FreeCycle or Craigslist, run some VMs on there and practice things. So this really brings us to this next point is that you need to have some of this, you need to bring this curiosity, this intellectual curiosity, this intellectual initiative to understand really why I stress having a home lab is so critical so that you can practice whatever skills it is that you're learning at that moment. If you've never hacked a password, then download Kali in a VM and stand up some Windows 7 server that's not patched and see what it's like to actually hack some passwords, right? But you're saying, well, I want to study policy. No better way to understand password policy than trying to hack a password and learn what password entropy really means the next time you write a ridiculous password policy, right? So, anyway, sidebar. So, the college courses that I have heard mostly from my friends and colleagues still aren't doing a very good job providing a lot of hands-on skills. And there's a lot of reasons that many programs struggle with this. A lot of times it's online. It's very difficult to have the lab set up. But there are some colleges who specialize in their cybersecurity programs a lot more. So you want to do some research as well and get reviews about particular organizations and what they do or don't offer. Like, I would not necessarily recommend the program I went through, right? And that has widely been the opinion of my friends and colleagues that took classes with that institution. But there are better institutions as well. So again, all those things cost money, so just get some reviews first and find out from other people whether the classes you're considering have good reviews, if that, for whatever purpose it is. If you're taking that to learn hands-on, see whether their labs are any good. There's lots of different ways you can set up your home lab. Again, just buy some cheapo computers that somebody's getting rid of. Or if you're interested in forensics, buy some cheapo computers somebody's getting rid of and then see what's on them still. Buy some cheapo electronics devices and phones on the internet and see what's on them still. Like, some people who are interested in forensics wanted some advice, and my advice was buy stuff on the internet and find all of the data that's still on it. Like, that's your own, it's choose your own adventure CTF for forensics, honestly. But you should be able to set up some VMs, and there's lots of walkthroughs to set up VMs. You don't have to use VMware. There's other options for you. You'll probably want to look into that. But I can't stress enough how critical this is. So why is he stressing all about these labs? Because a lot of people will say, well, I don't have practical hands-on experience because I can't get a job, because I don't have practical hands-on experience because I can't get a job. All right. So this is where my crazy advice comes in. You probably want to take a look at how you have your resume formatted and have a section on there for independent research or continuing education or independent study, and list the things that you're doing. I'm going to particular CTFs. I'm going to B-Sides Pittsburgh. I'm part of the ISC Squared chapter. I go to ISSA events. And describe your home lab and the specific things you're working on for that job that you're trying to break into, right? Because not everything is applicable. You can also have multiple versions of your resume depending on what it is that you're applying for as well. So maybe you could have a section in your cover letter that covers that if you don't want to change your resume. And there are people that are out there to help you build your resumes as well. But I would say if you're practicing in your home lab because you really want to be good at a SOC entry-level, SOC Tier 1 type of analyst, which is how a lot of people get started, and you're going to have to be doing a bunch of log analysis, practice Windows log analysis in your house, practice packet capture, and be able to find different information in the PCAP itself. And then you could list that under independent study. It's not the same as professional experience, but it may catch someone's eye, and that's you're really trying to differentiate yourself. So I really like this slide. This slide is called Why My Mom Thinks I Know Everything About Computers, or Google It would be the other name of this slide. So this is a really big skill in IT and cybersecurity, and it's hard to characterize. It's called Tuesday, and something has happened, and no one knows how to do that thing, right? That's anybody in cybersecurity will hopefully agree that this is very true. So we tried the thing. Did that work? No. And then we tried the next thing. Well, that didn't work either. Well, go to Google. Did that work? No. Now we call other people. Now we call other departments. Now we call our professional colleagues who work in other areas, because that's how we solve problems in cybersecurity. But this is true even at the beginner level. So as you're working with mentors or friends who know you're trying to get into here and you're having trouble doing something in a CTF, maybe an online CTF, or you're just trying to understand something in a book and it's not working in your home lab, if you're asking for help from professionals, they're probably going to ask you, well, what have you already tried, right? And that's where we want to see that if we're mentoring you or we're one of your professional colleagues, that you are trying different things for whatever that situation is in your home lab. And again, that tells me that you have that initiative and curiosity to excel in this field. If you're like, well, I Googled it and I tried that thing that came up and that didn't work, you're going to have trouble finding technical people to continue to help you, right? So this is an area, cybersecurity, where a lot of people will bang their head on the wall and try lots of different things to solve a problem or solve a situation. And that process is related to learning things in your lab as well. And the other thing, while I'm on this slide, I'll talk about your lab, is that some people who are trying to pivot into cybersecurity have sort of a fear factor, an intimidation factor, because they're going to mess something up. Yes, you are. I have bricked a number of computers, and those were great learning experiences, and I have never screwed up a computer exactly that way since then, right? But that's true, right? Think back to when we were in middle school. We didn't get every test answer right. Like, there's a learning process that occurs here, so you will probably make some mistakes, so don't do this on your family's only computer that you pay the bills on. Go get something from eBay, find out what's still on it. Do some experiments, get some VMs, because you don't want to ruin the only computer that you have or the one that you need for college or whatever. So that's why I'm saying there's some other options here. But you shouldn't be afraid to experience failure as part of this learning experience in your home lab. That you should actually embrace that a little bit. It'll probably be scary when it happens, and then Windows doesn't boot for some reason anymore because you've changed some files or whatever, and then you just learn how terrible it is to install Windows as an operating system, which is a good learning experience. And that's why everyone should use Linux. So some other specific things. So when we talk about sort of entry-level security type jobs, I wanted to give another example of some specific tools that you might want to use in your lab as it pertains to sort of security defense, security analyst. These go by any number of different names in our world that you could practice in your home lab to find out what's really going on. Right, so this is like, if you're one of those people, it's like Control-Alt-Delete, and then we can see all the processes Windows running, because Windows is running 186 processes, and that's why it's terrible. Right? This is sort of all the next level of everything else Windows is doing that's terrible, or whatever operating system. So, for instance, if you've never really messed around and understood Windows, then WinSysInternals is a really interesting tool suite, and there's a lot of different administrative tools available for that to help you understand what's really going on your Windows system. Why do you have 10,000 TCP IP connections open right now? I have no idea, probably because it's Windows. Not that I hate Windows, that's how this is coming across. If you're really interested in forensics, there's a bulk extractor tool. There are some specific forensic CTFs that are out there where you'll have to use some some forensics tools in the CTF. There's a bunch of free steganography tools that are available if you want to really understand how stego works. So again, I don't want you to study forensics tools if you're interested in being a vulnerability tester, right? Then go to Nessus, right? So again, that's how scoping this will help you sort of narrow down some of the things you could be working on in your lab, because there's way too much. And again, password cracking tools, if you've never passed, I don't care what role you want, go crack some passwords. That's pretty cool. It's a very interesting experience to actually crack some passwords. Whichever way you want to try and crack the password, it's a very interesting experience to see that happen. Try to hack into a Windows 98 VM just to see what it's like, even if that's not really the thing you want to do. That's a very interesting experience. There are still Windows 98 boxes out in the world. So I work in the DoD. So again, if you're in your home lab and you're working on all this stuff, and there's a couple different tools that are probably related to that job you want, again, try to be as proficient as you can be with those tools in your home lab. So when you write, I'm proficient with Wireshark and Nessus on your resume, you're not lying, but you're not misrepresenting it either, right? You're listing that under independent research, right? Don't list it under some sort of professional career area. Make sure you call it out, but that may get you past that 10-second screening, because it shows that you obviously are doing things that other people aren't doing who are trying to break into the industry. So I know it's been almost 30 minutes and you're like, this guy still hasn't told me how to get a job. I'm sorry. So there's, again, what type of specific job are you trying to get? So a lot of people don't want to hear this advice that you have to develop a whole bunch of technical skills. Some of this you're going to have to just invest time on your own in your own lab, right? And then you're going to have to network, like in person, which you guys are doing all here today. And then there's going to be an opportunity. And then you hope that that guy that you met on LinkedIn that you've connected with remembers that you were looking for the job. People don't like to hear that that's still how job happens. But in my experience, that's how a lot of actual openings get filled. So lots of people apply online to the websites and they don't hear back, because if I know that my colleague is recommending somebody that he knows wants a job, I'm much more likely to consider that candidate because it's coming through my professional network. Now, that's not good, fair, bad. It's just, in my experience, what very typically happens. So go to the ISC Squared, go to CTFs, continue to go to events like this. You got a bunch of colleges here in Pittsburgh, so I'm sure they have tons of events if you're local here. So go to all of their events that you can. So you may need some certifications. It depends on the job. You may not need certifications. You may want to take a look at the job descriptions that are related to that particular field you're interested in to see if that's coming up as a requirement. So again, we've talked about SANS a little bit. I still think certified ethical hacker has a little bit of weight. There will be people that disagree with me. That's why they're called opinions. I still think possibly having that certification means that you at least understand the basics of hacking, and that's very helpful. If you're on the defensive side, we need to know what the attackers are doing, or else what else are we basing the defense on? So it's pretty important to understand what the attackers are doing. Can you do packet analysis? Maybe your job doesn't require you to do packet analysis, but if that question comes up in an interview and you're able to describe the process or possibly even show me how a TCP three-way handshake looks at the packet level, that tells me you have a certain level of understanding at that point, even though it may not be a core skill that you're going to use. A lot of admins and cybersecurity people protect Windows because it's what most people use, but do you really understand Windows Server? Do you understand domain functionality? Do you understand group policy settings, right? If you don't, download a Windows Server ISO, stand it up in your lab, break it lots of times, look at all the configuration settings, figure out everything there is about that. You're gonna have to know VMware, I think, for a lot of different hands-on technical jobs. I think that's a pretty critical skill. It's also critical for you to play around in your home lab or do CTFs in some cases. If you're doing anything with malware, you're going to want to do it in a VM. Linux, you probably should know some flavor and ability to navigate in Linux. It's not necessary for every field or every job, but knowing that there's operating systems beyond Windows is pretty important, and knowing how to use them is going to be pretty critical. You might want to look at all the OSINT tools. A lot of these OSINT tools are used across different cybersecurity disciplines and different jobs. VirusTotal is a really big one. Sites like Central Ops, tools like Maltego. I think Nessus is a really good, free vulnerability scanner you could play around with at your house and understand. Scan your house, look at the vulnerability report if you've never seen one before. And Burp Suite will show you the horrors of the internet and why internet websites are bad. Right? There is no better tool than Burp Suite for you to never buy anything on the internet again, which of course we will all do anyway. So again, this is just some advice, I think, that if you're using that home lab and trying to have that portion of your resume or be able to talk to a variety of tools is useful. So the other problem with getting that first job is like, well, we need somebody who understands Splunk. Okay, well, I might not understand Splunk, but I could possibly speak to related tools that allow me to do maybe similar analysis, right? So it depends. It's going to depend on what that interview panel really considers. Are they hiring somebody that knows Splunk, or are they hiring somebody that has the initiative to be an interesting and curious cybersecurity engineer, right? Not all panels and not all people who make the final decisions are going to have the same outlook when they're hiring a candidate. And some people really like breaking things and hacking things, and there's obviously room for all people in this world in cybersecurity. So again, this is not something you're probably going to get many entry-level jobs into. So I don't want to dissuade you from having the goal of being a white hat hacker, an ethical hacker, but there's a process. There's a lot that you need to know to get that first entry-level job on the red team, or that first entry-level job as a white hat hacker. So again, there's lots of free resources on how to go about that particular journey once you know all the IT fundamentals, once you have a pretty solid cybersecurity background as well. Then you could move on to start doing your self-study to try to get that next role if you want to really be a pen tester, if that's your goal. So I don't want to make it sound like nobody should be a pen tester, because trust me, we need pen testers. I just want to make sure we're setting some ground rules for what's kind of realistic versus entry-level jobs. So there's a lot of different resources up here as well. And there's lots of other things that I have some resources too. Like there's cyber counterintelligence roles if you're really interested in sort of the DoD and defense contractor world. That starts to get a little bit more specific. I have some things linking in here about advanced persistent threats. If you're really interested in cyber threat intel, I can give you a lot more resources about that. So I debated a lot about whether I want to keep this slide in or not, but I get a lot of questions about this, and there's not really a good answer about cybersecurity career paths. So I don't like any of the graphics that came up, so I picked one. So in this one, it looks like, oh, the pen tester, like that's the epitome. And clearly there is some sense that that's correct, because they do require so much knowledge in engineering, and it also requires the right people to be pen testers, right? We all probably know some pen testers, and there's a certain mentality and a personality that goes along with somebody that's a really good pen tester. But that doesn't mean everybody wants to be a pen tester either, which is fine, because we need, the guy on the SOC or the girl on the SOC who's been there for 15 years, and every time nobody can answer the question anymore, we all turn to that expert who's been there a long time. We need that person too, and they may never want to be a pen tester, and that's fine. We also need people like myself who've managed to work themselves into management. Yay. So we need people like that who can lead teams for whatever discipline that you're in, so that we can understand the team and whatever technical aspect the team is, and then talk to non-technical people, right? Talk to the board, talk to management, talk to leadership. So I'm not a big fan of cybersecurity career paths. I know some people who are pen testers who started out as EMTs. I started out in the Army and Intel. There's lots of different ways people can find themselves involved in cybersecurity and in this as a profession. So if anybody has told you, well, you can't do this, you don't have the background, well, screw that person. I don't know who they are. But there's lots of people who eventually become cybersecurity experts and work in this field who come from all sorts of different types of backgrounds. Some people are just going to have to work at it a little harder, or it might take a little bit more time if you don't have that IT background first. So I think anything's possible if you're willing to put in the effort. So other things about getting that first job and really pivoting here into cybersecurity. So continue to network, have some business cards. I don't know, maybe I'm getting too old and people don't have business cards. For like $20, you can go on Vistaprint and print a business card that has your name and email and phone number on it. So, I mean, that's how I operate. I'm gonna take all the business cards I got here and try to find everybody on LinkedIn and try to link up, right? Not everybody does that. Lots and lots of people are using Twitter nowadays. But you have to have some sort of way to network to build that professional association of people who work in this field. So whatever works for you, you should continue to do that. Again, I think it's all about knowing the right people, having some skills for a particular opening, and then there is a degree of luck, right? But you have some power here in that process to influence it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to tell you is, if you've been applying for jobs and it's not working, change your resume. Blog, write some code on GitHub if that's your thing. Do some things that make your resume stand out during that 10 to 20 seconds that it gets that initial look, so you make the next cut. That's really what you're trying to do, right? And also be realistic about the types of jobs you're trying to get if you are entering into this field as a new person. You are not going to be a tier 2 pen tester. Like that, stop applying for that job. Just stop applying for that job if you don't have that background and the experience. So shift jobs, definitely apply for those. Use headhunters on the internet, right? There's some other strategies potentially available too if you're really struggling, and we could talk about that, or you should have a mentor that can talk through some of that as well. I would say definitely prepare for your interview. If this is a new field for you, and you don't have lots of experience in IT and cybersecurity, then I would definitely prepare for the interview. There's lots of questions you can get on the internet about what's really likely to be asked. There's really, in a standard interview, there's a couple core technical questions that will probably be asked and a couple core non-technical questions that will be asked. And you should be able to answer those ones that are very typical in a manner that makes it seem like you've also prepared for the interview. So this is the other thing when you go into that interview. As somebody that hires people, I am hiring the whole person, right? I don't just get your cybersecurity skills. I get your social interaction skills, your presentation skills. I'm hiring that whole person into the organization. So I'm taking everything into consideration. How interested do you seem to be in the job? If you don't seem to be interested, I don't understand why you're interviewing with me. That has happened more than one time. I really don't understand. Maybe it's a weird government thing. I don't know. Right? But if you don't even seem like you want to be here, we'll go through the motions because I have to, but you're not being selected. There's lots of different types of people in cybersecurity as well. So I wouldn't change your hairstyle. Don't get caught up in all that kind of stuff. As a mentor, be who you are, because if you're trying to get hired by an organization and they can't accept you for the person you are, that's not somewhere you want to work either. So I'm going to throw that out there too. Because not only are you interviewing for the position, you are also interviewing that organization. Is that somewhere you want to work? You do want to keep that in mind. I know you want the job, but you want to keep in mind, is that a place you want to work? And I have been burned before and lied to in an interview, so you just kind of want to keep that in mind too. The interview is a two-way process. When you get a question that you don't know the answer to, there's one way you can answer that, and there's a better way you can answer that question. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you can say, no, I don't know the answer. Or you could say, I don't know that answer yet, but I would first research it on the internet and see if I could figure it out. And then I would go around to my coworkers and see if they knew the answer. And if that didn't help, maybe I would go to my professional network. Right? This is why you want to practice interviews. There's places and people that can help you with interviews, or you could just ask your friends and family, random people in Pittsburgh help. That might not be a good idea. Again, study what you enjoy. Don't study things that you hate. And try to find mentors. The one thing I will say about mentors is that you shouldn't only have mentors where you work. All right? Because I have mentored people, and it was clearly time for them to go to another company to get another job. And I told them that. I didn't really care. I was their mentor. But you will find that if your mentors are only at the organization you work at, most of them probably aren't going to tell you when they think it's time for you to actually leave that organization if you are trying to pursue career advancement and it's not happening. So, which is another thing to keep in mind. So have some varied mentorship perhaps as well. The last thing about mentors I want to say is that if you've been in cybersecurity for a couple of years, you're on your first or second job, maybe the high school or your alma mater could really use you to come back and talk. And you may not think of yourself as a mentor because you're not old, but you're old enough to provide really valuable insights to that 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid or the high school hacker team or whatever they've got. So think about that as well. We need more mentors in this field, so I would encourage you to try to look for opportunities to give back to those that need advice at whatever level or age group they are. So there's a lot of other links in here. I really like the career advice because I don't think that career advice and mentorship across a career is something that is done very often or as widely as I would like to see it in cybersecurity. So just a lot more links there. And then a lot more resources. So when you get the slide deck, you can have all of these. But I would like to entertain questions now, if you guys have some questions. So I don't have a particular silver bullet, but hopefully I have some advice that will help you because we need all of you in cybersecurity. So if you're not in cybersecurity already, we want you in cybersecurity. We, the global we, the mysterious we. Any questions? Yes. So the question is, could I talk a little bit more about vulnerability analysts? Sure. So your vulnerability analysts are generally going to use a tool like Nessus. Even the DoD has a renamed version, and it's basically Nessus. It's one of the most popular ones. It's not the only vulnerability tool out there. And a lot of vulnerability analysis today is done on websites, web servers, front end. That's where a lot of the breaches are coming from, is from vulnerabilities that are on web servers. So that's kind of a focus today, but that's not the only thing. Websites, web servers are not the only thing vulnerability assessments and testing are done on, but it seems to be very popular right now. So some big companies will have vulnerability assessment teams. So this is very, very similar, or also a way to talk about bug bounty programs too a little bit. That could be another way that you could put something on your resume if you do find legitimate bugs, and that's it's confirmed that was a vulnerability or an actual bug. You can add that to your resume as well. More of the bigger companies are starting to understand they need some vulnerability management programs in place because so many of the breaches are just coming from unpatched and misconfigured externally facing devices and sites. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay? Anybody else? Yes? Yeah, so there are a number of like legitimate bug bounty programs like HackerOne. There are some DoD ones that my organization actually runs for DoD things, but don't just randomly hack things on the internet. That is not advice you were given today. Like, go through particular programs if you're interested in doing bug bounties. A lot of times they're scoped, and then you'll have legal protections for that as well. So you just want to be careful with that. If that is of interest to you, that's great. There's a lot of crowdsourcing bug bounty type things out there. So whether it's, Google has programs, and I know Facebook has some programs as well. So just make sure you're going through whatever the company has in place for that, so that you don't find yourself in any sort of legal jeopardy. Yes. Yeah. So the comment here is there are some other niche areas that are still starting to grow, like compliance with HIPAA, PCI, some of the NIST requirements for DoD contractors. So again, this field is continually growing and changing. So there are some other new skill sets sort of near compliance and policy where there may be even more jobs opening up. I definitely know policy people have then pivoted into more technical roles as well. So even if you don't love policy, there are people who love policy. I don't understand them. I don't understand you, sir. But there are people who, like, because they know the policy so well, then decide eventually to become more technical as well. So again, there's lots of different career paths. There are no right or wrong ways to continue your career if you want to progress based on where you find yourself in cybersecurity. So we still have a couple more minutes if you guys have questions. Yes. Yeah, so there's some work-life balance issues that some people excel at and others don't, depending on their personality and role. I mean, I have friends that have like stacks of equipment in their house, and they're always researching new things. And then I have people that go home at the end of the day and they don't do computer things. So there's always going to be a balance that you'll have to find, and that may be something that changes over time. So you may do a whole bunch of stuff because you're interested in something, and then you sort of like ramp down, and then you ramp back up again later. As I said in my intro, like, I do a lot of stuff with soccer, so I don't tend to go home and spend hours and hours on end doing things, but I follow things related to cyber threat information. So I'm following the blogs, I'm following people on Twitter, and I'm trying to stay up to things that directly affect my job. So I stay connected with that core sort of competencies. But I think you have to find whatever balance works for you. If you're trying to break into the field, there's going to be a lot more learning you have to do initially. So when I'm hiring more junior people, that's where I really have to see, like, you're passionate, like, you're interested in learning all about this, because there's going to be a lot to learn as part of, as being a new person onto my team. But that doesn't mean that the people I have on my team shouldn't show some level of interest and passion going forward too. Because there's continual learning. I don't care what field you do end up in, there's continual learning. If you're not a person that wants to be in that sort of field, then don't be in IT and cybersecurity, because it's changing all the time. So whether it's policy, compliance, pen testing, vulnerability management, it's changing very rapidly all the time. So at a minimum, you need to be intellectually curious enough to stay up to date with whatever is required at a minimum for your job or your job field.
If there are more questions, I can walk over with a mic as well, so feel free.
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes, so I'm happy to try to answer a question or make something up.
Thank you. So my question is, I just graduated college. I have 4 years of internship experience. Most of it has been an insider threat. and I loved what I did. It was a lot of fun, and I'm very thankful for the experience I had. But I'm finding more so that my passion might be somewhere else in security. Should my first job opportunity, should I be seeking out something in insider threat and then try to move laterally within a company for that? Or should I take the time now to kind of build some more of the prerequisites for some of these other positions and then aim for those for my first job?
I don't know that there are wrong answers to that, except move laterally in your company. So I come from the Maryland, DC, Virginia, northern area, and most of the time when people move laterally, it's not with that same company. There are, in today's market, there is a lot of mobility in cybersecurity. So, and since nobody has retirement plans anymore, basically, there's very little incentive in a lot of cases, again, this is my opinion, to necessarily stay at some company and have that level of dedication. Now, there's pros and cons to everything. You don't want to always move around either, right? That may say something about your personality, but there are a lot of resumes where every 3 years somebody is moving on to a new company. Like, that is pretty standard MO in the contracting world in the greater DC area. And that may not be true in other markets, though. So you'll want to take a look at that because, in my opinion, somebody that has stayed at a company now for a really long time in the same role may not be somebody that's my first choice to hire. But now if they've moved throughout the company, that's fine as well. So it is hard to find a company, though, that will necessarily let you do that. It is frankly difficult to sometimes find the company that has enough flexibility in their structure and their management organization and their business unit lines to let you go from one role to another role. And I'm not going to say it's impossible, but you may face difficulties, which is, again, why I think you should have mentors outside of that primary job that you have as well, because there may be an opportunity. If you take that cyber threat intel role and you're in it for 2 or 3 years and there's just empty promises that one day maybe will move you, it may be time to find another opportunity and then pivot into that other role that you think you might want more. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but those are my thoughts about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we've got 2 over here.
You had mentioned making the slides available. How do you get them?
I assume there's a B-Sides Pittsburgh site. Is that right? B-Sides Pittsburgh site?
Oh, and they'll be available on that?
I think so, or email me and I will send them out.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right, but if you want the actual slides with all the hyperlinks, you can just email me. I will send them to you. That's probably the easiest way.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, John. So I'm currently in the process of building up my own lab, but right now I'm kind of cash-strapped and space-strapped. So should I be getting myself a desktop so I can have a little bit more power, or should I be getting a laptop? And then Linux, should I be going after Kali, or would Ubuntu or any other version work as well?
What skills are you trying to develop?
I started out doing auditing and compliance, but now trying to shift into doing more like pen testing, CTF, just for fun and career advancement. So
you'll probably want one computer that can run Kali Linux, either natively, just install it, or in a VM, and you'll need another computer to probably run like at least one basic VM, so you can hack and use all the tools in Metasploit against that other box. You can try to do it on one box, but then that box has to be able to run multiple virtual machines. So it may be cheaper to get less expensive hardware, all right, and like $150 laptop or something, or whatever's available on Craigslist or FreeCycle or something like that, and just like sort of install an operating system and go whack it a whole bunch of times and see what it's like to break in or scan it and things like that. So you'll just need at least one computer that can run Kali probably, because that's really where you'll learn all the pen testing and red teaming tools. Not every pen test and red team tool is in Kali, but it is basically where everyone should start, I think, because of the Metasploit suite in particular. That's commonly used by pen testing teams as the core operating system they're going to use. There's got to be hopefully some cheap stuff either in FreeCycle, Craigslist, or eBay. So you need at least one that'll run Kali, but it might be cheaper to actually have 2 cheap machines than one that will run multiple virtual machines.
And one more question, if I may.
Sure.
You mentioned you work for DoD. Should I be focusing on getting a CompTIA like Network Plus or Security Plus if I'm trying to get into governments, or should I be going for other certs?
Sure. So a lot of DoD contracting and organizations require you to have a certain DoD 8570 level certification. You can Google that online and look that up. It may make sense to at least get a Network Plus or a Security Plus certification. But again, you don't have to spend all the money on the boot camp either. You can self-study and then just try to take the exam. I think having some certifications when you're trying to change roles or really break in are still worthwhile, right? Some people have different opinions about that, but I still think it shows that you've done something. You've obviously studied enough to go past the exam, which means you should have some sort of baseline level of information. So I, as someone who hires people, looks at all of the things, including certifications and on your own studying and attending conferences, and I try to take all of that into consideration. So I think there's more upside than downside to get a Net Plus or a Sec Plus still. So
Thank you.
yeah. I think we're about out of time unless somebody has a quick question I can answer in about a minute and a half. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the comment was you could use AWS or maybe other cloud instances to try to do some of this. In my experience, sometimes there's an intimidation factor with that people just starting out in this field have, but that's another option would be to use AWS or something like that. All right, if you guys have other questions, I'll be around. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
One last question?
Maybe, we got 1 minute.
Here, real quick, Microsoft used to offer server for technical people, TechNet I think it was called, right? And they don't anymore. Any recommendations on where to get cheap Windows server to break
from
things?
this handy collection of basic ISO files, which so far I think is still available that I'm hosting. If you have trouble with them, I can repost certain ones. I don't know that I have the latest version of server, but you can find server ISOs that are not loaded with malware still.
Nice, thanks.
Absolutely. All right, thank you guys so much for coming.